Hello everyone. Been under the weather for a while, but I am back. This is Premark9 here, and today I want to make a video explaining the basics of the pendulum mechanic. For those of you that haven't been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! In a while and you're hearing about this and it just seems utterly confusing. I know some people that have been playing the game from Synchros, Xyz, and then as soon as the Pendulum era started, they just stopped and said, what the hell do I do with this? So I'm going to explain to you what the hell you do with this. Now, the one thing that makes Pendulum cards interesting is that Pendulum cards are treated as both spell cards and monsters, depending on where you place them. You'll know a card is a Pendulum card by looking at it, and you'll see that it has this thing on the ends here called scales. The scales vary in numbers. Ideally, the best scales are either a very high number or a very low number. They have an effect in the box between those 2 points called the scales, and that's called the pendulum effect. You only apply that effect when it's in the pendulum zone. When a card's in the pendulum zone, it is treated as a spell card. Everywhere else, it's treated as a monster. It doesn't matter if it's on the field, in the graveyard. It doesn't matter if it's in your hand. It doesn't matter if it's in your extra deck. If a pendulum card is anywhere outside of the pendulum zone, it is for all intents and purposes treated as a monster. Pendulum cards, when they are face up on the field, do not go to the graveyard and instead go to the extra deck. Face up, so that you and everybody else can see them. Now, the most interesting thing about them is how to perform pendulum summoning. Ta-da! This is the ideal pendulum scale setup for my deck. On one hand, I have Dragon Pulse Magician, which has a scale of 1, a very low number. And on the other one is Dragon Pit Magician, which has a very high scale of 8. When performing a pendulum summon, you have to have a card in each pendulum zone before pendulum summoning. And you can only pendulum summon monsters whose levels are between the numbers on the scales. Not equal to the scales, however. So, with this particular scale setup, I can't pendulum summon any level 1 monsters or level 8 monsters, but I can summon anything level 7 all the way down to level 2. So, hypothetically, if I wanted a pendulum summon, I could do this. If all of these monsters are in my hand, I could special summon each one of them at once. A pendulum summon is treated as one large summon. All of the monsters are summoned at once. They are not treated as individual summons. This means if your opponent plays a card such as Solemn Warning, I don't think Black Horn of Heaven can negate multiple summons. Solemn Warning, Bottomless Trap Hole, or any card that would respond to a single summon, all of the monsters in the pendulum summon are affected at once. This is the biggest risk in pendulum summoning, as you could lose an entirety of monsters at once, and you can only pendulum summon once per turn. If you pendulum summon and your opponent tampers with it, well, you've just lost a really large amount of momentum right there. When pendulum monsters are face up in the extra deck, they can also be pendulum summoned from the extra deck, meaning that each turn they can come back. This gives pendulums a unique sense of versatility, and more importantly, they have attrition. As long as you have access to pendulums, you can continuously keep summoning, and this can make them really hard to deal with. That being said, being able to protect your pendulum scales, or at the very least if something happens to them, being able to put new ones down, is pretty important. Ideally, if you're going to be playing a deck that plays pendulums, most if not all of the monsters in your deck should be pendulum monsters, because you want to make sure that you're able to get as many options for pendulum summoning as you want. Now, like I said, Dragon Pulse and Dragon Pit Magician are my ideal choices for my pendulum scales, but they are far from the only options I have available. I have multiple different monsters in the current deck that I'm showing here to use for pendulum summoning. As a result, I don't have to depend on these two monsters to pendulum summon. I can use substitutes of other cards. But, like I said, you need to be able to keep both of the scales up. You cannot pendulum summon with only one scale. So it is pretty important that you protect your pendulum scales. Now, the most interesting thing about pendulum summoning is the fact that it allows you to summon a bunch of monsters at once. Means it leaves you a lot of options to stack up your extra deck. Let some of your pendulums get summoned, use them for synchro summoning, use them for fusions. If they end up getting destroyed in battle or by card effect, that's okay, because they're just going to go to the extra deck anyway, and they'll come back in greater numbers, like sand people. When this happens, you'll be able to amass a large array of monsters over time. In fact, there are certain cards in Pendulum decks that are designed explicitly to do this, that they go to the extra deck by destroying themselves on purpose in order to set up the extra deck. Wisdom Eye Magician, for example, is one of them. And so is Odd Eye's Pendulum Dragon, which is something of a staple in pretty much any Pendulum deck, save for a few. These cards destroy themselves and then benefit you in effect. At the end phase that you place Odd Eye's Pendulum Dragon in the Pendulum Zone, you can destroy it and then search your deck for a Pendulum monster, any Pendulum monster with 1500 or less attack. So, it puts itself in the extra deck, setting up a Pendulum Summon, and it also frees up a point in your scales, and it lets you search a card so you can get exactly what you need. Wisdom Eye Magician, if it's in a Pendulum Zone and the other card in the Pendulum Zone is a Magician, I can destroy Wisdom Eye Magician, and I can put a completely different Magician in the Pendulum Zone where it was. So I destroy it and I get one of these. Basically is what I would do. So that's essentially what I wanted to show you all, that it's still a pretty complicated strategy. It's very confusing at first. You just need to give it a try. If any of you are still very confused as to how this works, try using a dueling simulator like Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro or Dev Pro to test it out, because these are simulators where they do the automatic function, kind of like the Yu-Gi-Oh! Games that they used to make all the time and now they don't make anymore. That way you can see the actual decks work in action. If you still don't want to give it a shot, that's fine too. And if any of you had no idea how pendulums work, I hope this helped you. Thanks for watching.